You're listening to the Valley Current.
You kind of imagine these massive, towering stacks of paper.
Oh, yeah, like hundreds of diplomats just sequestered in some Swiss hotel for months.
Exactly. Just months or even years of this grinding line-by-line negotiation.
Yeah.
Right? And legal annexes that literally weigh as much as a phone book.
Yeah, the classic kind of monolithic peace accord.
Right. But I want you to picture this scene instead, because it completely, it totally shatters that precedent. It's Wednesday, June 17th, 2026.
Right in the middle of the G7 summit.
Yes, exactly. And the setting is the Palace of Versailles, just outside Paris. So you have the mirrored halls, centuries of history, the absolute pinnacle of French grandeur.
It's quite the backdrop.
It is. And the American president and the French president are having dinner. But this massive historic moment isn't happening in some grand signing ceremony with fancy pens. It's happening via an electronic signature.
An electronic signature on a document that is roughly 800 words long.
Which is wild.
That is less than 2 pages of standard text. And yet, that little digital handshake paused a 40-day, literally global economy rattling war between the United States and Iran.
It's just staggering.
Yeah.
So welcome to the deep dive. If you've been watching the news or, looking at your retirement accounts in a panic, or just staring in shock at the price of gasoline over the last month and a half, you know exactly what war we are talking about.
Yeah, everyone felt it.
But the peace, or, whatever we're calling this pause in the violence right now, it is incredibly complex. So our mission for today's deep dive is to kind of get past the screaming headlines and the political spin. We are going straight to the source material.
And we've got a fantastic source for this.
You do. We are unpacking a highly detailed special geopolitics and decision theory briefing. It was published on June 18th, 2026 by Computer Law Group, LLP. And they've put together this incredibly rigorous framework, just dissecting the exact mechanics of this new 14-point agreement.
And, we are going to use that briefing to do really 3 main things today. First, we need to dissect exactly what is inside this new 14-point document, which is officially being called the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding.
Right, the MOU.
Exactly. Second, we have to compare it structurally to the past, and specifically the 2015 nuclear deal. And third, and honestly perhaps most importantly, we are going to uncover the unseen forces that are actually moving the geopolitical chessboard right now.
Because, look, whether you are a commodities trader obsessing over Brent crude futures, or a policy analyst, or just someone trying to understand what this fundamentally changed world means for you, we want to give you a clear, totally impartial map of the situation.
And I think impartial is the crucial word here, right?
Oh, absolutely. The political rhetoric around this document is just white hot right now.
Yeah, it's intense.
Very. We are out here to endorse the political side. We are here to look at the architecture of the agreement, the structural forces that brought it into existence, and of course the ripple effects hitting the markets.
It is entirely an exercise in structural analysis. The briefing provides this really great lens to understand the incentives of the players rather than, judging their morality.
Exactly. Now, the way I'm kind of conceptualizing this entire geopolitical scenario, and I really want you, the listener, to keep this image in your head as we go through this deep dive. It's like a giant, super high-stakes game of musical chairs.
I like that analogy.
Right. For decades, the U.S. and Iran have been circling these chairs. But in 2026, it's not just that the music stopped. The music has changed entirely to a different genre. And the chairs are now armed with naval mines.
Yeah, the stakes are so much higher.
The players are being forced to navigate a completely different set of physical and economic rules. So before we get into the grand strategy and the game theory and all that, we need to look at the exact words on the page. Let's talk about the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding.
Well, it's named for the location of the mediation, obviously. Pakistan served as the intermediary here. And if we break down those 800 words, the 14 points essentially fall into 4 functional categories.
Okay, what are those?
You've got the immediate cessation of violence, the reopening of maritime choke points, massive economic incentives, and finally, the nuclear question.
Let's start with the violence, because, that is what was absolutely terrifying the global markets. The last 40 days have seen missile exchanges, disrupted supply chains, and just a massive spike in global anxiety.
A total panic.
Right. So paragraph 1 of the MOU terminates military operations on all fronts. And it explicitly includes Lebanon. I want to pause there, actually. What does terminating operations on all fronts actually look like in practice when you are dealing with a conflict that is this decentralized?
That's the hard part, right? In a modern asymmetric conflict, a ceasefire is incredibly difficult to coordinate because you aren't just dealing with uniformed armies facing each other across a trench.
Right, there's no clear battlefield.
Exactly. So all fronts means the U.S. halting airstrikes and drone operations, sure, but it also means Iran must instantly rein in its regional proxy network.
Which is huge.
It is. And the specific mention of Lebanon is vital because it involves Hezbollah, which, possesses a massive, highly sophisticated missile arsenal pointed directly at Israel.
So it's a regional issue.
Yeah, by putting Lebanon in paragraph 1, the MOU acknowledges that this isn't just a bilateral U.S.-Iran war, it's a regional firestorm that requires a regional dampening.
And paragraph 4 pairs with that dampening by addressing the water. It commits the United States to begin removing its naval blockade immediately, with a promise to fully end it within 30 days.
Which is big concession.
Logistically, lifting a blockade of that scale, we were talking about carrier strike groups, destroyers, submarines. That is a massive repositioning of military hardware, isn't it?
It's a massive undertaking, yeah. And it comes with profound vulnerability. The U.S. is essentially agreeing to pull back its physical containment ring.
Just backing away.
Right. Furthermore, the U.S. undertakes to withdraw forces from Iran's immediate proximity 30 days after a final deal is reached. So there is this phased pullback. First, stop shooting. Second, lift the blockade within a month. Third, pull back over the horizon later.
Okay, so the shooting stops and the ships pull back. That brings us to paragraph 5, which is arguably the heartbeat of the global economy, the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, this is the big one.
For the listener who might just know it as a name on a map, this is that narrow waterway connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. Paragraph 5 states that Iran agrees to use best efforts for the safe passage of commercial vessels, and they agree to do it with no charge for 60 days.
That 60-day part is critical.
Yeah, we'll definitely get back to that. They also promise to finish demining the strait within 30 days. What I really want to know is, what does the reality of a mine strait actually do to international shipping?
To put it bluntly, it freezes it, just completely freezes it.
Wow.
During the 40-day war, traffic through the strait collapsed by roughly 90%.
90%?
Yeah. When there are naval mines in the water, marine insurance premiums skyrocket to the point where it just becomes economically unviable to move a tanker.
Because the risk is just too high.
Exactly. Think about it. A single supertanker can hold 2 million barrels of oil. If that ship hits a mine, you have an environmental catastrophe, massive loss of life, and literally $250 million of cargo just gone.
So ships simply stop.
They do. They drop anchor in the Gulf of Oman or the Arabian Sea, and they just wait. Demining is a slow, incredibly dangerous process involving, specialized vessels and submersibles.
It's not like sweeping a floor.
Not at all. Yeah. Giving Iran 30 days to clear the mines they lead is acknowledging the physical reality of how hard it is to undo that specific kind of warfare.
Okay, so the immediate relief is pretty clear. The missiles stop flying, the U.S. lifts the blockade, and the mines come out of the water so the oil can finally flow again.
Right.
But then we get to the second category of the MOU, which is the sweeteners.
Yeah.
The economic package. And I have to say, when I read this part of the briefing, my jaw actually dropped.
It's quite the number.
It is. Paragraph 6 pledges a reconstruction and economic development plan for Iran of at least $300 billion. Let me just repeat that. $300 billion. What is the mechanism for that kind of money? Is the U.S. taxpayer on the hook for this?
No, and the briefing makes this distinction very clearly. This is not $300 billion directly appropriated by the U.S. Congress.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, if it were, it would never survive the political process in Washington. The text specifically notes this is to be developed with regional partners.
So we are talking about Gulf states, maybe European entities, essentially just passing the hat to fund a massive infrastructure rebuild.
Precisely. It is an aspiration to pool capital from countries that have a really vested interest in keeping the region stable and, more importantly, the strait open.
But still, that dollar figure is insane.
Well, it is meant to be a shock and awe number. It is meant to signal to the Iranian domestic audience that the economic dividends of peace are overwhelmingly massive.
And it doesn't even stop with promises of future reconstruction, right? Paragraphs 10 and 11 bring immediate tangible, cash-in-hand sweeteners.
Yes, the immediate relief.
The U.S. Treasury will issue waivers letting Iran export crude oil and petroleum products the literal moment the MOU is signed. Plus, the U.S. unfreezes Iran's restricted funds, so the assets are released. Iran goes from this suffocating economic vice to having the cash spigots turned on instantly.
Which is a massive shift. And that brings us to the most complex and historically the most contentious bucket of this entire agreement.
It's a nuclear file.
The nuclear file, yes. Paragraph 8 handles this. And compared to the massive economic promises, the nuclear constraints are shockingly minimal.
Just strikingly thin. I mean, I read paragraph 8 a few times just to make sure I wasn't missing a page or something.
Many people did.
It basically just has Iran reaffirming that it shall not procure or develop nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And then they agree to figure out what to do with their enriched uranium stockpile using a minimum methodology of downblending it on site under IAEA supervision. I really need an ELI 5 here. Like, explain it. Like, I'm 5. What exactly does downblending mean mechanically, and why does it matter?
Okay, so to understand downblending, you have to understand enrichment first.
Yeah.
Natural uranium dug out of the ground is mostly made of an isotope called U-238. But the isotope you actually need to create a nuclear chain reaction, whether that's for a power plant or a bomb, is U-235.
Thought.
Now, natural uranium only has about 0.7% of this U-235. It's heavily diluted.
Right, so you have to separate it out somehow.
Exactly. You turn the uranium into a gas and you literally spin it in centrifuges at supersonic speeds. The slightly heavier U-238 gets pushed to the outside and the lighter U-235 concentrates in the middle.
So it's just spinning it out.
Yeah, and you repeat this thousands of times. If you enrich it to about 3.5% or 4%, you have fuel for a standard civilian power plant. But if you keep spinning it until it's 90% U-235, you have weapons-grade material.
Okay, so they have this highly enriched stockpile sitting there. What is downblending?
Downblending is basically the physical reversal of that threat. You take that highly concentrated, really dangerous U-235, and you chemically mix it back together with natural, unenriched uranium.
Oh, I see.
You are essentially pouring water back into the whiskey. Once it is physically mixed and diluted back down to a low percentage, it cannot be used for a weapon without running it entirely through the massive centrifuge cascade all over again.
Which would take a lot of time.
And it's easily detectable by inspectors.
Okay, that makes sense physically. It diffuses the immediate bomb material.
Yeah.
But here is my fundamental issue with paragraph 8. They agree to downblend, sure, but there's absolutely no enrichment cap mentioned in the text.
None at all.
There's no ceiling on the total stockpile size. There is no limit on how many centrifuges they can keep spinning. They just push all the actual hard mathematical constraints to future discussions.
And that is the glaring omission that critics of the deal point to immediately. The MOU agrees to discuss Iran's enrichment and nuclear needs later, based on some framework to be agreed upon in a final deal.
Just kicking the can down the road.
Basically, it freezes the current reality, but it leaves all the highly technical, incredibly restrictive parameters completely unspecified.
So if this new deal is incredibly fragile and essentially just defers the most important questions, why did the U.S. sign it?
Well,
I mean, I have to push back on the terminology here a bit. We are calling this a peace deal in the media, but an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, is not a treaty.
legally, no, it isn't.
Right. A treaty is a formal, legally binding instrument ratified by a legislature, like the U.S. Senate. It has actual legal teeth. An MOU is basically just a handshake on paper.
Right.
If this document has so little enforceable legal weight and all hard nuclear questions are kicked down the road, isn't this essentially just a promise to keep talking for 60 days?
Legally speaking, yes, absolutely. It is a political framework, not a binding contract. International law doesn't enforce this. Either side could theoretically walk away tomorrow without violating a ratified treaty. But the reason it holds massive weight in the immediate term isn't because of international tribunals in The Hague. It holds weight because of the raw, coercive threat hanging directly over it.
Ah, you're talking about the quote from President Trump at the G7.
Yes. The architecture of this MOU only makes sense when you pair it with the explicit framing provided by the U.S. president.
The quote is chillingly straightforward. He said, and I'm reading this verbatim from the briefing, "If it doesn't get done in 60 days, that's all right. We go back to bombing. I don't want to do that because it's so good, but we might have to because we're never going to let them have a nuclear weapon."
And that quote is the ultimate enforcement mechanism. The CLG briefing emphasizes this really heavily. This MOU is not a final piece. It is a 60-day countdown clock.
Just a timer ticking down.
Exactly. The MOU buys 2 months of quiet. It reopens the strait so global markets can actually breathe again. It establishes a framework for real negotiations. But it is entirely sustained by the explicit threat of renewed, overwhelming military force.
So the final deal doesn't exist yet?
No. The real instrument, a binding final deal endorsed by a UN Security Council resolution, which is promised in paragraph 14, doesn't actually exist yet.
It goes back to the musical chairs analogy. The music hasn't stopped forever. Someone just hit pause on the stereo, and they set a 60-second timer.
Right.
When that timer hits 0, if they haven't figured out a new set of rules, the music blasts back on, and the chairs are still rigged with explosives.
That is an incredibly apt way to visualize the tension of the next 2 months.
So to truly grasp the magnitude of this 2026 handshake, we can't just analyze it in a vacuum. We have to understand the precedent. We have to set it right next to the last time the world tried to solve this exact same puzzle.
And that means looking at 2015.
Right. We need to compare it to President Obama's 2015 agreement, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, universally known as the JCPOA.
And this is where the briefing structural analysis is incredibly illuminating. And again, just to reiterate for the listener, we are strictly impartial here.
Oh, totally.
The political world in the United States and abroad is deeply divided on which approach, 2015 or 2026, is superior. Both sides possess highly coherent, logical arguments.
Right. Our job is not to declare a winner, but to show how structurally different these two documents are.
Exactly.
Let's wind the clock back to the 2015 JCPOA. When I look at the stats on this document, it is just staggering. It was 109 pages long. It had 5 highly technical annexes.
A literal book.
Yeah. And it was completely multilateral, negotiated over years with a P5+1. That means the permanent members of the UN Security Council, so the US, UK, France, Russia, China, plus Germany, and the European Union.
It was a massive global effort.
And the math inside it was incredibly exact. It didn't just say we will downblend later. It capped uranium enrichment at exactly 3.67% for 15 years.
And we touched on this earlier, but that 3.67% number wasn't just pulled out of thin air.
Right.
It is the exact threshold required to fuel standard commercial nuclear power reactors. But it is vastly below the 90% required for a weapon.
So it was very deliberate.
Highly deliberate. By capping it there, the JCPOA mathematically ensured Iran could have civilian nuclear power, but physically could not build a bomb without blatantly violating the threshold.
It also limited the physical stockpile of enriched uranium to exactly 300 kilograms. Why 300 kilograms specifically?
Because of a concept called breakout time.
Okay, what is that?
Well, if a country decides to sprint for a nuclear weapon, how long does it take them to enrich enough material for one bomb? If you have a massive stockpile of, say, 20% enriched uranium, your breakout time might be weeks.
Very fast.
Too fast. By capping the stockpile at 300 kilograms of only 3.67% purity, the 2015 agreement mathematically extended Iran's breakout time to roughly 1 year.
Wow.
Yeah, it provided a massive buffer for the international community to respond if Iran decided to cheat.
It even dictated the hardware, right? It allowed exactly 6,104 IR-1 centrifuges, which were their oldest, least efficient models. It was, as you called it, basically an engineering document masquerading as a diplomatic agreement.
It really was. And crucially, we must remember the context of its creation. The JCPOA was negotiated over years of steady, grinding diplomacy in Vienna and Geneva during a period where there was no active hot war between the United States and Iran.
That's a huge difference.
It is. The primary objective was singular and focused. Pure, mathematically verifiable nuclear nonproliferation.
Now contrast that massive 109-page engineering manual with the 2026 MOU. Like we said, it's about 800 words. It is strictly bilateral, just the U.S. and Iran, with Pakistan acting as a messenger.
Very streamlined.
And the nuclear specifics, the exact math, are virtually non-existent.
Right.
But while it is paper thin on the nuclear side, it is vastly broader in its regional scope.
Right.
I mean, JCPOA didn't even mention the Strait of Hormuz. It didn't address the proxy forces in Lebanon. It certainly didn't pledge a $300 billion regional reconstruction plan.
No, not at all.
The 2026 MOU tackles the immediate regional firestorm, but leaves the nuclear core smoldering in the background.
And that is the fundamental trade-off at the heart of this entire geopolitical debate. It's depth versus breadth.
Depth versus breadth.
Exactly. The 2015 JCPOA was incredibly deep on nuclear constraints, but super narrow in its regional scope. The 2026 MOU is incredibly broad in its scope. I mean, it actually ends a shooting war and reopens a global economic artery, but it is paper thin on the actual mechanics of nuclear physics.
And the political reactions align exactly with what people value more. depth or breadth. The briefing outlines the deep partisan divide here. Let's look at the critics of the 2026 deal first. And I think it's important to note this criticism comes from both the political left and the right in the U.S.
Oh, absolutely.
When they look at this MOU, they see total capitulation.
Well, the critics look at the ledger of the agreement. They point out that Iran receives full, immediate sanctions relief. They get immediate U.S. Treasury waivers to sell their oil on the open market. They get their frozen international assets repatriated.
And the $300 billion pledge?
Right. They get a pledge for a $300 billion reconstruction plan. That is an enormous influx of wealth and legitimacy. And in exchange, the critics argue, Iran doesn't have to agree to a single hard mathematical cap on their enrichment levels or their centrifuge operations.
Right. You have voices like Republican Senator Bill Cassidy explicitly calling it a lousy deal. You have Senator John Cornyn dismissing it as a mere intermission before the next inevitable crisis.
And former President Obama weighed in, too.
He did. Former President Barack Obama stated publicly that it is highly doubtful any new vague agreement will be a significant improvement from the rigorous 2015 deal his administration negotiated.
So the core criticism is that the U.S. essentially gave away its maximum leverage just to stop the bleeding of a 40-day war,
leaving the Iranian regime financially enriched and structurally intact.
But then you have the defenders of the 2026 deal, and their argument is not based on engineering. It is based on immediate, real-world pragmatism.
Right.
The defenders point out one undeniable, overwhelming fact. This MOU stopped an active, devastating shooting war.
Which, if you are watching your shipping costs quadruple or you have family in the military, is really the only metric that matters.
Precisely. Furthermore, the defenders argue that it reopened a global economic choke point that carries 1/5 of the world's petroleum.
It's just a massive economic relief.
It is. Several Senate Republicans defended the 2026 framework by pointing out a stark alternative. Whatever flaws the MOU has, they argue, it is vastly preferable to deploying tens of thousands of U.S. ground troops into a Middle Eastern quagmire to forcefully pacify the region.
Oh, sure. They also note the clever structuring of the money. By relying on regional partners for the $300 billion, it theoretically keeps the massive financial burden off the American taxpayer's shoulders.
And there is a strategic argument made by the defenders regarding the 40-day war itself, actually.
What's that?
They argue that the U.S. military strikes during those 40 days significantly degraded Iran's nuclear infrastructure and missile capabilities physically. Therefore, they claim, the 2026 war achieved by sheer kinetic force what the 2015 JCPOA tried to achieve by international inspection.
Interesting. So it really boils down to your core geopolitical philosophy. Do you value the absolute, verifiable mathematical certainty of nuclear containment? If so, you prefer the architecture of 2015.
Right.
Do you value ending a hot war immediately, keeping U.S. troops out of a ground invasion, and preventing a global economic heart attack by reopening the Strait of Hormuz? Then you might defend the architecture of 2026.
However, if we strip away the partisan talking points, the briefing highlights a neutral, structural truth here. And honestly, this might be the most profound insight in the entire analysis.
Okay, let's hear it.
The 2015 JCPOA, despite its 109 pages of technical brilliance and its massive multilateral endorsement, failed structurally.
Right.
And it didn't fail because the centrifuge math was wrong or because the IAEA inspectors missed something. It failed because its survival depended almost entirely on the continuous political will of the American presidency.
Oh, wow.
In 2018, a single U.S. election cycle resulted in a change of administration, the U.S. withdrew from the agreement, and the entire multilateral edifice just collapsed.
Wait, so you're saying the most technically brilliant non-proliferation treaty of the century failed purely because of domestic Washington politics?
Yes. The structural flaw of the JCPOA was its political fragility.
That's crazy to think about.
Now, apply that realization to 2026. If a multilateral, meticulously detailed, UN-endorsed agreement negotiated over years was that fragile? I mean, how fragile is an 800-word bilateral handshake that relies on a 60-day countdown clock and improvised promises?
It's made of glass. It could literally shatter at any moment.
Structurally, this new agreement is profoundly vulnerable to domestic political shifts. It is just a temporary equilibrium.
Which brings us to the absolute core of this deep dive.
Yeah.
Why did the shape of the deal change so drastically? Like, why abandon the ironclad math of 2015 for a flimsy handshake in 2026?
That's the real question.
To understand that, we have to look at how the weapons of leverage have evolved. The briefing introduces a brilliant game theory lens to explain this shift.
Yeah, they use the concept of a Nash equilibrium.
Right, game theory.
For those who might not have taken a game theory seminar recently, a Nash equilibrium is a stable state in a competitive game. It is a situation where no player can gain a better outcome by unilaterally changing their own strategy, assuming the other players keep their strategies unchanged.
So everyone is just stuck doing what they're doing.
Everyone is doing the best they can, given what everyone else is doing.
The classic ELI 5 example for this is a traffic jam.
Exactly.
If everyone is stuck in their lane and no lane is moving faster than the other, no individual driver benefits from suddenly swerving into the next lane.
Right, you just stay put.
It's a miserable state, but it is a stable equilibrium because changing your strategy doesn't improve your payoff. But the key to game theory is that an equilibrium is only stable relative to a specific set of rewards and costs, so the payoff matrix.
Correct.
If you fundamentally change the rewards or the costs of the game, the equilibrium point physically moves.
Exactly. And the central thesis of the CLG briefing is that two massive distinct engines altered the payoff matrix between 2015 and 2026.
Two engines.
Yes. These engines force the equilibrium to move away from the deep, narrow JCPOA and settle on this broad, shallow, 60-day MOU. Engine 1 is technology and the Strait of Hormuz. Engine 2 is domestic politics.
I really want to dive deep into Engine 1 technology because I don't fully understand the geography and history here. In 2015, the Strait of Hormuz wasn't the center of the negotiations.
Not at all.
It was open, oil was flowing, it was essentially background noise. But in 2026, it became the absolute center of gravity for the entire war. What changed in a decade? Did the geography shrink?
Well, the geography hasn't changed, but the technology to exploit it has.
How so?
Let's look at the map. The Strait of Hormuz is the only sea passage from the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. At its narrowest point, it is only 21 miles wide.
Okay.
But the actual shipping lanes, the deep water necessary for massive supertankers, are only 2 miles wide in either direction.
Wait, 2 miles? That is an incredibly narrow needle to thread for the global economy.
It is a profound bottleneck. Roughly 20 million barrels of oil transit through that 2-mile wide lane every single day.
Wow.
That is roughly 1/5 of total global petroleum consumption. And the briefing makes a crucial point. There is no easy alternative. You can't just route trucks around it.
You can't bypass it.
Not really. Yeah. There is only about 2.6 million barrels per day of spare pipeline capacity that bypasses the strait. If the strait closes, 17 million barrels of oil vanish from the global market instantly.
But why couldn't Iran just close it in 2015? Why is 2026 so different?
Because of the democratization of asymmetric weapons. In 2015, naval supremacy was largely defined by massive platforms, U.S. carrier strike groups, destroyers, multi-billion-dollar assets. Iran couldn't match that conventionally.
Right.
But over the last decade, Iran invested heavily in cheap, dispersed, highly lethal technology. We are talking about advanced naval mines that are incredibly difficult to detect. We are talking about massive swarms of autonomous explosive drones.
Swarms of drones.
Swarms and fleets of fast attack boats armed with anti-ship missiles that can just hide in the jagged coastal inlets along the Iranian shore.
So instead of building one massive warship that the U.S. could easily track and sink, they built thousands of tiny lethal mosquitoes.
That's a great way to put it.
How does a swarm of fast attack boats actually threaten a modern navy, though, or a massive oil tanker?
Well, a supertanker is massive, slow, and unarmored. It takes miles just to turn around. A swarm of 50 fast boats, coordinating via encrypted communications, can surround a tanker in minutes.
Oh, I see.
Even if a U.S. destroyer is nearby, its defense systems are designed to shoot down high-altitude missiles or fight other big warships. Defending against dozens of cheap surface threats simultaneously while avoiding collateral damage to the tanker is just a nightmare scenario.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, once mines are in the water, the U.S. Navy's advanced radar and cruise missiles are totally useless against them.
Yeah, it's the concept of being unbombable. You can't just send a B-2 stealth bomber to destroy 1,000 sea mines hidden underwater or a swarm of drones hidden in some coastal cave.
Exactly. This cheap technology completely flipped the cost-benefit analysis of warfare in the Gulf. It made closing the strait incredibly easy for Iran, highly credible, and almost impossible to solve purely with airstrikes.
The leverage shifted so dramatically that U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio literally called Iran's control of the strait their economic nuclear weapon.
It is a profound analogy.
I want to really unpack that analogy, though, because on the surface, it sounds like hyperbole. Why is the ability to close a commercial strait considered better geopolitical leverage than actually building a real nuclear bomb?
Yeah.
A nuke is the ultimate trump card, isn't it?
A nuclear weapon is the ultimate weapon of destruction, absolutely. But it is a terrible weapon of coercion because it is essentially unusable.
Right.
Think about the mechanics. Building a nuclear weapon is slow. It requires massive, highly visible infrastructure like the Natanz enrichment facility that satellites and inspectors can spot easily.
They see it coming a mile away.
Yeah, and it invites crippling preemptive sanctions. And most importantly, actually detonating a nuclear weapon is suicidal.
Because of mutually assured destruction. If they use it, the response from the U.S. or Israel would be regime-ending.
Correct. It is a weapon you spend billions to build, entirely so you never have to actually use it. But the ability to close a strait with cheap mines and drones, that is the exact opposite.
Because you can actually use it.
Right. It's fast to deploy, it's cheap, and critically, it is highly usable without triggering the literal end of the world. It hurts the global economy, it spikes oil prices, it causes political chaos in Western capitals, but it doesn't cross the nuclear threshold.
It's just dialing up the pain.
It is a tunable dial of economic strangulation. Therefore, as an instrument of daily geopolitical leverage, analysts argue it is far more credible and immediately potent than a latent nuclear program.
So the payoff matrix shifted entirely. In 2015, Iran's main leverage was the threat of a future nuclear weapon. So the JCPOA was built entirely to contain that specific threat. But by 2026, Iran's main leverage was their immediate proven ability to strangle the global economy through the strait. And that shifting leverage leads us to what the briefing identifies as the next massive legal flashpoint, which is maritime law.
Yes, the UNCLOS dispute, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. This might sound like a dry academic topic, but it is actually the fault line where the next war could easily start.
Because paragraph 5 of the MOU contains this hidden trapdoor. It says Iran will allow safe passage with no charge for 60 days only. That explicitly implies that on day 61, they fully intend to start sending invoices and toll bills to oil tankers passing through.
And the legal framework surrounding that threat is fiercely contested. We kind of need a brief history lesson on UNCLOS here.
Okay, let's hear it.
Negotiated in the 1970s and 1982, UNCS established the rules for how countries claim territorial waters and economic zones. Crucially, under UNCLOS, ships passing through an international strait connecting two parts of the high seas, like the Strait of Hormuz, enjoy a concept called the right of transit passage.
What does that actually mean in plain English?
It means the coastal state cannot impede the ships, cannot suspend their passage, and most importantly, under Article 26 of the Convention, cannot charge a toll just for the privilege of passing through.
So no toll booths.
Exactly. You can only charge for specific physical services rendered, like, providing a towboat or a specialized pilot to guide them through a dangerous reef. You cannot set up a turnpike toll booth.
So the United States and Oman, which shares the southern half of the strait, look at this law and say, you can't charge a toll, it's an international waterway, end of story. But Iran has a completely different interpretation of international law.
Right. And here's the legal loophole. Iran signed UNCLOS back in 1982, but their parliament never actually ratified it. Therefore, they argue that they are a persistent objector and that the liberal rules of transit passage only apply as a treaty obligation between countries that actually ratified the document.
Wait, didn't the U.S. also refuse to ratify UNCLOS?
Yes. The United States never ratified UNCLOS, largely due to disputes in the 1980s over deep-sea mining regulations.
The plot thickens.
It does. However, the U.S. maintains that the navigational rules of UNCLOS have become customary international law, meaning they apply to everyone, everywhere, regardless of ratification.
But Iran doesn't buy that.
Iran rejects this entirely. Since neither country ratified the treaty, Iran claims they don't owe U.S. or allied ships unrestricted transit. Instead, Iran claims a stricter, older regime called innocent passage, which gives the coastal state much more authority to regulate, restrict, and potentially charge for passage based on their own national security interests.
And they aren't just writing legal papers about this. The briefing notes that in May 2026, right in the middle of the war, Iran established an entirely new bureaucratic entity, the Persian Gulf Strait Authority.
They're literally building the administrative toll booths.
And the quote from the Iranian lead negotiator, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, is remarkably blunt. He said, "The Strait of Hormuz will never return to its previous condition. Naturally, we will charge fees."
Connect this back to the economic nuclear weapon analogy. A weapon only serves as a deterrent as long as it stays holstered.
Right.
The moment Iran activates the Persian Gulf Strait Authority and starts demanding transit fees from international shipping, they are firing that weapon at the global economy.
Which is an act of war.
And that action immediately hands the United States and its regional allies the legal and political justification for renewed military strikes. This intricate dispute over maritime law isn't going to be settled by lawyers in The Hague. If the toll booth's open, it's going to be settled by Tomahawk missiles.
Okay, so that is Engine 1, technology in the Strait. The physical reality of how leverage is applied fundamentally changed. But the briefing states that Engine 2 is weighted equally enforcing this 2026 MOU. And Engine 2 is domestic politics.
Right, the political clocks.
This is the idea that leaders don't just act as cold, rational, robotic calculators of absolute national interest. They are human beings acting on their own personal domestic political clocks.
This brings us to a fundamental concept in political science known as the bargaining model of war.
Okay.
The model suggests that wars happen when there is an information asymmetry, or when parties cannot commit to a credible deal. But a key corollary to this is that the domestic political incentives of the leaders are often the first-order determinants of peace.
So their own survival matters more.
Exactly. A leader might agree to a geopolitically weak deal if it guarantees their own domestic survival. We saw how domestic politics killed the JCPOA in 2018. In 2026, we have a perfect storm of converging political clocks that made continuing the war political suicide for everyone involved.
Let's run through those specific clocks because the timing is incredible. First, you have Israel. There is an impending Israeli Knesset election scheduled for October 2026. Explain the dynamic there.
Well, Israel operates on a parliamentary proportional representation system, which means coalition governments are inherently fragile. The Israeli political establishment and the electorate are watching this U.S.-Iran war with existential intensity. Iran is the primary sponsor of Hezbollah and Hamas. Any diplomatic move the U.S. makes regarding Iran has massive, immediate ripple effects on Israeli domestic security, and therefore on who takes power in Jerusalem.
It's all connected.
Very much so. A perceived U.S. capitulation empowers hardliners in Israel. A perceived U.S. victory might stabilize a centrist coalition. The October deadline means every Israeli politician is maneuvering based on the outcome of this MOU.
Then you have the United States clock. The midterm elections are coming up in November 2026. Historically, what is the correlation between an active war, spiking gas prices, and the fate of the incumbent party in Washington?
It is historically fatal. Just fatal.
Wow.
If you have an active war in the Middle East, the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and gasoline spikes to $6 or $7 a gallon in the U.S. right before an election, the incumbent party will almost certainly lose control of Congress.
People vote with their wallets.
Always. The psychological impact of the price sign at the local gas station on the American consumer's voting habits cannot be overstated. The political imperative in Washington to avoid a massive energy shock before November was an immense, invisible hand driving the U.S. negotiators toward a ceasefire.
And finally, you have the internal clock inside Iran. The briefing outlines a massive leadership transition that happened simultaneously with the war. The previous supreme leader was killed at the outset of the conflict. Now his son, Mojtaba Khamenei, is the new supreme leader.
And stepping into the role of supreme leader, especially following a deeply entrenched figure like his father, is an incredibly precarious moment.
He has to prove himself.
Exactly. Mojtaba Khamenei represents the hardline faction. He is looking to aggressively consolidate his power among the clerics and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC.
He needs a win.
He fundamentally needs a win. He needs the economic bleeding of the war to stop, hence the desire for sanctions relief. But crucially, he cannot appear weak to his hardline base.
Ah, I see.
This explains the aggressive posture regarding the toll booths on the Strait and his absolute refusal to agree to the humiliating exact nuclear caps that defined the 2015 deal.
So when you zoom out and look at those three converging clocks, an October Israeli election, a November U.S. midterm election focused on gas prices, and a new Iranian supreme leader desperately trying to consolidate power without looking weak, you realize that the payoff matrix for continuing a hot war was terrible for every single leader involved.
Exactly. They all needed a pause. And that is why we got a 60-day, 800-word MOU rather than a comprehensive 10-year treaty.
Makes perfect sense now.
The MOU wasn't designed to solve a 50-year geopolitical conflict. It was designed entirely to help these specific leaders survive the next 6 months of their own domestic politics.
Knowing these engines, the asymmetric technology and the desperate political clocks, let's look at the actual ledger of this deal, the real-world fallout, the winners, the losers, and the markets. Because the financial markets did not wait for the ink to dry on the electronic signature at Versailles. They reacted instantly.
The market reaction is the most brutally honest scorecard of the new geopolitical reality. Let's look at the lifeblood of the situation. Oil prices.
The big one.
During the 40-day war, when the strait was effectively closed, Brent crude spiked to a peak of around $126 a barrel.
Which is incredibly painful. I mean, for the average listener, $126 a barrel means surging prices for literally everything. It hurts shipping costs, it jacks up airline tickets, it makes manufacturing more expensive, and it directly hits your wallet during your daily commute.
It is a massive tax on the entire global economy. But on the pure optimism of the MOU being signed and the 60-day pause being enacted, Brent crude dropped back down to roughly $83 a barrel.
That's quite a drop.
Now, $83 is still higher than the pre-war levels, which were hovering in the 60s. That delta represents the ongoing risk premium, the market acknowledging that the underlying conflict isn't actually solved. But dropping from $126 to $83 was a massive relief rally.
But the macroeconomic damage of those 40 days was already baked in, right? The briefing highlights the post-war global growth revisions published by the International Monetary Fund. Who actually paid the price for this 40-day shutdown?
The IMF data is fascinating. The world as a whole took a 0.2% hit to global economic growth.
That sounds small, but it's not.
That is hundreds of billions of dollars in wealth just erased, gone, simply because a fifth of the world's oil flows were put at risk for just over a month. But that pain was not distributed equally.
Geography and energy dependence become destiny here. The briefing notes that the United Kingdom was the biggest loser on the board.
Yes, the UK took a massive 0.5% drag on their growth. European nations, and the UK specifically, are highly import-dependent for their energy. When the Middle East chokes, their industrial base just starves.
Meanwhile, the United States was relatively cushioned. They only took a 0.1% hit. Why the discrepancy?
Because the structure of the U.S. energy economy has changed dramatically over the last 15 years.
Fracking, right.
Right. The U.S. is now a net energy exporter, largely due to the shale revolution. When global oil prices spike, it hurts the American consumer at the pump, absolutely. But it also translates into massive windfall profits for domestic energy producers in Texas, North Dakota, and the Gulf Coast.
So they offset the pain.
The U.S. economy has a built-in shock absorber that Europe simply lacks.
And then there's the ultimate wild card in global energy, Russia. According to the IMF data in the briefing, Russia actually wins in this scenario. Their growth was revised upward by 0.3%. How does a war between the U.S. and Iran help Moscow?
It's the harsh, unsentimental reality of commodity markets. Russia is a major global energy exporter, but their export infrastructure is located entirely outside the Persian Gulf.
Oh, of course.
They use pipelines to Asia or ports in the Baltic and Black Seas. When the Strait of Hormuz is choked off, the world doesn't stop needing oil. The demand remains constant. So nations are willing to pay a massive premium to secure safe, non-Gulf crude.
And Russia is right there to sell it.
Yeah. Russia benefited immensely from the choke point shock, selling their oil at inflated prices to desperate buyers.
It really shows how deeply interconnected the system is. Pulling a lever in the Persian Gulf dispenses cash in Moscow. And speaking of massive amounts of cash, let's talk about the $300 billion reconstruction math from paragraph 6 of the MOU.
Yes, the sweeteners.
The briefing provides a really interesting historical comparison to put that number in context. They compare it to the Marshall Plan.
Yeah, the Marshall Plan was the legendary U.S. initiative that rebuilt Western Europe after the devastation of World War II. It is the gold standard for post-war economic reconstruction.
But the math here is just staggering. Adjusted for inflation, the entire Marshall Plan would be worth about $150 billion in today's dollars. So this proposed reconstruction plan for Iran is roughly double the size of the Marshall Plan. For a single country.
It is a breathtaking sum. Now, we must emphasize the briefing's heavy caveat here. Right now, this $300 billion is purely an aspiration.
It's just a promise.
There is no appropriated money yet, just a diplomatic pledge to find regional partners willing to fund it. But the sheer scale of the ambition demonstrates how desperate the negotiating parties are to change the fundamental economic realities on the ground.
They are trying to buy a durable peace with overwhelming capital.
Exactly.
But as we know, money alone doesn't solve deep-seated cultural and political grievances. In Israel, the political fallout has been seismic. The deal is viewed by large segments of the Israeli public not as a peace, but as a dangerous capitulation that leaves Iran's nuclear potential untouched and their proxy networks totally intact.
And we can track that reaction mathematically through prediction markets.
Really?
Yeah, the briefing points to the Kalshi prediction market, which allows users to bet real money on future events. The market for who will be the next Israeli prime minister shows a completely fractured, wide-open succession race.
That's a total toss-up.
You have the incumbent, Benjamin Netanyahu, the former military chief, Gadi Eisenkot, and former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, all clustered tightly in the 30 to 45% probability band. The Israeli electorate is reacting directly to the perceived fragility of this MOU, and they are seeking a leader who can navigate the day after the 60-day clock expires.
And it's not just Israel experiencing this cultural whiplash. In the United States, the hyper-technical debate over the 2015 JCPOA versus the 2026 MOU has completely breached the containment of think tanks and policy journals.
It's everywhere now.
It has entered the mainstream cultural zeitgeist as a proxy for pure partisan identity.
The briefing mentions a remarkable anecdote to illustrate this. In Chicago, shortly after the MOU was signed, a grassroots petition was launched to rename the street where the Trump Tower sits.
Oh, I heard about this.
Yeah. The proposed new name was Barack Obama Avenue or something similar, explicitly contrasting the authors of the two different Iran deals.
And within days, it had over 22,000 signatures. It perfectly encapsulates how a debate over uranium enrichment levels and maritime transit laws has morphed into a public square battle over the legacies of two vastly different American presidents.
It proves that international diplomacy is never divorced from domestic culture wars.
So, bringing this massive analysis all home for you, the listener. You are tracking the headlines, you are watching the oil markets fluctuate, and you're trying to understand where the world goes from here. Based on the CLG briefing, what is the ultimate expert takeaway? How should we be watching this situation unfold?
The primary directive is to watch the 60-day clock with intense skeptical scrutiny. Do not assume this digital signature represents a durable peace.
Keep your eyes open.
The very first hard structural test arrives at day 30. That is the explicit deadline for the U.S. to fully remove its naval blockade and for Iran to finish the perilous job of demining the Strait of Hormuz.
What if they don't?
If we hit day 30 and there are still mines in the water or the U.S. carriers haven't pulled back, the deal's already fracturing.
And for anyone operating in the global business world, shipping, energy, finance, the compliance warning from the briefing is stark. Do not immediately unwind your sanctions compliance postures just because of a reversible handshake at Versailles.
Absolutely not.
The political speeches mean nothing until the legal paperwork catches up. You have to watch the actual specific licenses being issued by the U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control.
Precisely. Watch what the Treasury does, not what the politicians say. And the ultimate, undeniable tripwire is day 61.
The trapdoor.
Remember the trapdoor in paragraph 5? Iran promised toll-free transit passage for 60 days only. If day 61 arrives and the newly minted Persian Gulf Strait Authority starts broadcasting demands for transit fees to international shipping, the back-to-bombing tail risk instantly resurfaces.
Just like that.
The fragile equilibrium will have violently shifted once again.
It all comes back to that deadly game of musical chairs. The music is paused right now. It's on a 60-day timer. But the chairs are still armed with naval mines, the players are sweating, and no one has agreed on what song plays next.
It's a very tense wait.
Which leaves us with one final provocative thought for you to chew on as you watch this play out. The sources deeply highlight how the 2015 JCPOA died simply because a single U.S. election cycle withdrew the political will sustaining it.
Right, domestic politics.
It was a victim of structural fragility. As you watch this new 60-day clock tick down, consider this. What happens if one of these domestic political clocks, like the upcoming Israeli election in October, or the massive pressure of the U.S. midterms in November, shifts the equilibrium again before day 61 even arrives?
It's entirely possible.
What if a leader suddenly decides that breaking the deal is actually better for their own political survival than keeping it? Are we watching the genesis of a durable peace process? Or are we just witnessing a temporary, politically convenient pause in a much larger, entirely unresolved game of global leverage?
It's the multi-trillion-dollar question.
Led by Jack Russo, Computer Law Group LLP is a bespoke business litigation and founder-friendly boutique law firm with offices and licensed attorneys in Silicon Valley, New York, and Tampa Bay. And you can reach Jack at computerlaw.com and his team at www.computerlaw.com, where the newsletter we referred to is published in detail and readily available, commitment-free, with no paywalls or other charges.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.